It is Friday, December 11th. Let's talk PlayStation. Alright, so the dust has finally settled from PlayStation Experience, and now there's some details that we're going to talk about that came out of the show, like after the fact, that we didn't cover up in the PSX video. We're going to get to that in a second, but first let's talk about the PS2 games on PlayStation 4, which we kind of talked about in the PSX video, but, you know, that is a thing now, basically. So PS2 games that officially launched on the PlayStation 4, they're kind of premium titles. They're not even called classics, they're just called PS2 games on the PS4 store, which I guess that's why Sony's trying to differentiate them from the fact that your purchases of PS2 classics on PS3 don't transfer over here, basically. They're not even calling them classics on PS4. But yeah, you know, they launched with 8 games. All the GTAs are on there, which, you know, that made me very happy because I've always wanted the GTA games with trophies. But you know, that is a thing now, and what that's going into is that we've already got announcements of more games coming. So Parappa the Rapper 2 is actually coming next week on the PlayStation Store, so you can expect that. And then the ESRB has rated the original Max Payne, the first Max Payne on PlayStation 2, so that is more than likely going to come as well. Another thing that was kind of interesting is on the PS Nation podcast, Shuhei Yoshida was on there and he was being interviewed, and he touched on Socom, basically. You know, we don't talk about Socom much, and that's probably because that there's been nothing to really talk about regarding Socom. We know that Sony shut down Zipper Interactive how many years ago now, and they haven't handed off Socom to another developer or anything, so that IP's been kind of dormant for a while. But the thing about Socom is, with that IP, the fans of Socom are very dedicated, and they're super they're just really hardcore into Socom, and that's cool. But people want to know what's going on there. Will we see a new Socom? And Shuhei basically commented saying that you shouldn't expect a new Socom anytime soon, especially in reference to the fact that PS2 games are now on PS4. You know, can we expect any sort of classic Socom game coming onto the PlayStation Store, like Socom 2 or something? Again, really no information there. He said no, don't expect anything anytime soon. And especially in that case, if you were to bring Socom 2 or 3 over to PS4, these are still the completely PS2 emulated games. So for them to say have online functionality, I would assume they would definitely have to go in and sort of retool the game and actually do a little bit of remastering, I guess. I use remastering loosely because they would have to just include online functionality, but these are still the PS2 games on PS4. They are not officially PS4 games. The PS4 is just doing extra hardware lifting to up-res it and to actually include that trophy support, which again the PS4 is doing on its end, not the games itself, which that kind of goes into that patent that is just monitoring the game's activity. The game isn't administering any of these things at all. This is all PS4 side. So basically just don't expect anything like that anytime soon, which is kind of disappointing because that is another IP that people love is Socom. Alright, but moving on to one thing that came out of PSX is that a PlayStation Now subscription for a limited time only is $100. $100 for a full year of PlayStation Now, which, if you're keeping count here, that actually puts it in line with a Netflix subscription, a Hulu subscription, or Amazon Prime. That is the lowest it's ever been. If you pay the full $100 up front, which that's how they get you, is that you have to pay the $100 up front to get the whole year, so you can't do it monthly. But if you do pay the full price up front, that's 55% off the original PlayStation Now price if you were to do, however they're doing it now with the 3-month price or whatever, or monthly, or however they're doing it. But yeah, at $100, that puts it at $9 a month or something like that. Basically, that's pretty affordable, and that's one of PlayStation Now's biggest problems, was that hey, people don't want to get into it because it's really pricey. Of course, the other thing is, if you don't have an internet connection at home that is stable enough for PlayStation Now, you really can't take advantage of it anyway. But I mean, that's kind of one of the big detractors that's finally away from PlayStation Now, at least for the time being, because this is a limited time offer price. But I think this is Sony's way of kind of testing such a low price to see if a lot of people join it, which they should do, because yeah, I have to imagine not many people have a PS Now subscription. I have to imagine not many people are actively using PlayStation Now. Whether people are buying 3-month passes or a month pass, or just doing it title by title, basically with the rental period times. Sony hasn't released any numbers, so I'm going to imagine that PS Now is not doing that great. So this is Sony's way of kind of testing the waters of a very low price, and that's the thing. That's an affordable price. You really can't bitch at a price like that, and if you do have a stable internet connection and you really can play the games reasonably, and you notice no noticeable hiccups basically when you're playing the game, and for $100 to access over 250 PlayStation 3 games, even that sounds like a good deal to me. That sounds actually pretty, that's actually, now we're talking. Like, now that seems like PS Now might be somewhat of a decent thing for some people. Of course, the streaming aspect still turns a lot of people off, but then I always think to myself, like, well, we kind of had the same attitude when, like, Netflix streaming started, and now look at Netflix. Now look at Hulu. Like, that's the most preferred way to watch content, period. So, I've always said PS Now has potential, and this is like a step in the right direction. All right, in an unsurprising turn of events, November NPD is out, and PlayStation 4 did come out on top. Not really surprising there. They had the price drop, and people like PS4 apparently. Who knew that, right? Sony's got all those great third-party marketing deals with Star Wars Battlefront and Destiny, The Taken King and stuff, and Call of Duty. So yeah, the system's doing pretty well. I think the one interesting thing is that Sony had mentioned how they're like trying at this point. They're like really comparing themselves to the PlayStation 2, and they're like trying to basically match the PlayStation 2's level of success or exceed it. And I've always said I don't expect PlayStation 4 to hit PS2 numbers at all, because PS2's up there. 150 million systems sold worldwide is pretty damn high, and I think the general consensus in the industry is that this life cycle for consoles is probably going to be a little bit shorter. So that's obviously going to deter from future sales of this console. Of course, over time we're not entirely sure where PS4 is going to stop selling. Basically, I mean, PS3's gotten to the point where it's at like 82 million right now, and it's like been at 82 million for a while. Like, that's where its sales have finally tapered off, basically. So you're not going to see any drastic PS3 sales increase in anytime soon. So when the next PlayStation comes out, when the next Xbox comes out, you can bet that the previous systems are going to taper off in sales pretty quickly. And since we're expecting a shorter cycle, it's just not going to happen. It's not going to hit PS2 numbers. But it's always good to be optimistic, I guess. But Sony is saying that for November they had the best Black Friday in PlayStation history ever, and they're also saying that for November it was the best month in the PlayStation Store's history as well. So I'm sure they're pretty happy about that. So now let's get to one little issue that's kind of a big talking point this past week. Of course, the Final Fantasy VII Remake was at PlayStation Experience, and we actually saw like a decent amount of footage for that game, and we actually saw like gameplay, and kind of threw a lot of people off, certainly threw me off. But the big announcement that came out after the fact is that the game is apparently going to be released in multiple parts, or episodic, I guess. Now, this news initially broke out, and a lot of people were like, "What? Whoa, why would you do that?" Initially that turned a lot of people off, and even when I read that, I'm like, okay, well, that's now I don't know how to feel about the game anymore, and that's a justified concern for a lot of people. But recently, Square Enix, Yoshinori Kitase followed up, kind of explaining this, so I'm going to read you some quotes he gave. With Final Fantasy VII Remake, we have the opportunity to go beyond the story, world, and experience of Final Fantasy VII in ways we've always dreamed of, from the depths of Midgar to the skies of the planet. The multi-part format enables us to expand the original story and turn it into an epic experience for fans and new gamers alike. He went on by saying, if we were to try to fit everything from the original game into one remake installment, we would have to cut various parts and create a condensed version of Final Fantasy VII. We knew none of you would have wanted that. Now here's the thing, because there's always a thing. But the thing is, it's easy to read PR statements and be a little suspicious about them and kind of take them with a grain of salt, because yeah, it's PR statements, and the whoever's making this quote, basically their back's against the wall and they got to defend their product. Understandable. But this is, I guess, one of the few situations where I can read this and I kind of see where he's coming from for a number of reasons. One is that makes an excellent point. I mean, we are in a generation now where games cost millions and millions of dollars to create, takes a very long time, and a big game like Final Fantasy VII, which if you've played, you kind of know what I'm talking about. It's a very big game. So the ambitious goal of remaking that entire game, it's a daunting task. There is no doubt about that, and I'm sure there's a lot of pressure on the team working on that game. But that also raises the question, when you're transferring a game that old and like completely doing it from the ground up on new hardware, it's just you always question yourself, and you think of certain levels in the game, you think of certain sections of the game, and you're thinking, how's it going to look today? And how are they going to do this? How's the whole thing going to look? And it's just like, it's very easy to see how he's kind of getting at here, which is that the game would be too big, and that possibly certain parts of the game would have to be cut if they would do it in one little release. Because that's another thing, this is like a big deal. I mean, when the Final Fantasy VII Remake was announced, the internet lost their shit, and understandably so, because it's Final Fantasy VII, and a lot of people hold this game dear to their hearts. But you always have this thinking in the back of your mind, well, how is the actual final product going to turn out? And that's like, that's why it's a daunting task, because there are such high expectations for this game. And that's why when it came out that it's going to be like multi-part and episodic, you had this thinking of like, why the hell are you doing that? That's totally, you know, you're expecting one $60 Blu-ray disc to go into your PlayStation 4 and you get to experience this awesome remake. But this is what explains to me why they actually had footage to show, because that's what I don't know about you, but when I was watching the footage at PSX, I'm like, holy shit, they actually have more to show of this game? This is not the Square Enix I know. This is Square Enix we're talking about. But when they when they announced it at E3, I was like, oh, this is awesome. Obviously, it's fantastic, but I'm thinking to myself like, okay, we're not going to see this game for a very long time, because it's Square Enix and it's a complete remake of a game that we all love. And then, you know, how long later we actually get to see gameplay of it, I'm thinking, holy shit, this is not the Square Enix I know. They actually have footage of this game now. They actually built more of it, but maybe that's why. Because they're releasing it in multiple parts, this, you know, it might explain why they actually have something to show for us, although it could possibly mean that they were working on the game for a much longer time than we initially thought. But either way, that kind of gives you an idea of what they want to do with Final Fantasy VII. The only thing you can really do, or at the very least the thing that I always do, is I always remain optimistic. So I just hope that when we see more of the game, when we get more explained to it, it's a best case scenario rather than a worst case scenario. And hopefully this means that what Yoshinori is saying is that they get to put all the content in the game. And even another thing is that he mentions that they want to add new areas to the game. They want to add stuff to it, which again, that's kind of tampering with the game, I guess. That's what I'm saying. Like, it's going to be hard to please everybody when you're kind of changing the game as much as you're doing, which you do have to change it a lot because it's coming from the PS1. You know what I'm saying? It's crazy. And hopefully it turns out good. Those are some of the news stories I want to talk about with you guys this week. So if you didn't notice already, there was no Ryan on Gaming because we uploaded a new tips and tricks video for PlayStation 4, 19 more tips and tricks for PlayStation 4. If you remember, I did one that was 20 tips and tricks. That was when the PS4 came out, but Sony added a lot more firmware updates. They added new features, and so we did a little updated video there. Check it out. I mean, it's mostly for like new owners that probably like just got a PS4, because I think it's fair to say like a lot of you guys probably knew all that stuff, but there might be one or two that you didn't know about in there, so go give it a look. And yeah, Ryan on Gaming will come back next Wednesday. I just don't want to like flood the channel with like 4 or 5 videos a week, so yeah, that'll come next. The new topic will be next week. And then Jak 2 is almost done. The final part will be uploaded this Monday, so if you want, submit like ideas for the next game I should play, because I don't even know what I'm going to be doing. I have like zero clue whatsoever, so by all means, give me ideas. And lastly, I wanted to announce, and I'm not going to spend too much time talking about this or make a big deal about it. I'm not going to like shove it down your throats, but I did start a Patreon campaign. I thought I'd try that. If you don't know what Patreon is, you can visit the link down below and go to my Patreon page. There's a video there explaining it, and it goes into like greater detail about what it is, why I started one, and everything. But I thought I'd at least try it. You know, you guys probably do know what it is by now, and it's understandable to see why like a lot of smaller channels like do a campaign. A lot of smaller creators turn to something like that. It is kind of like a situation where it's to make more money from YouTube or whatever it is you're trying to do. At least for me, I'll explain that it's not so much about making more money. It's just that like I work a lot of hours at my current job, so like money's not really an issue for me. It's just that I like doing YouTube a lot, you know what I'm saying? So if the campaign turns out pretty good, I could maybe like, you know, take an extra day off or two like during the week or something to work on a video instead, which I think would be pretty cool. So I thought I'd give it a shot. If it doesn't work out, I'll probably like cancel the campaign or something, but there's a lot of cool rewards up there and everything. If you do decide that you're generous enough to donate. If you don't, then by all means don't. Nothing will change on the channel. Hopefully if the campaign does good, then the channel will only get better. So anyway, the link for the Patreon is down below in the description, and thank you all so much for watching the channel for the 3 years I've been doing this now. Alright, I'm done. I'm out of here. So that concludes this week's episode of Let's Talk PlayStation. I'm Ryan Benecki. Thank you all so much for talking with me, and I'll see you guys next Friday.